welcome back to the brand new video of PD Pinofum. Yep, that's me. First off, I apologize for my echo problem. I still haven't managed to fix it yet. Also, have you noticed my fan art wall? It's new, it's a work in progress. Any art sent to me by my PO box or online will be printed out and hang up on this wall. As well as letters, like this one. In this video, we will be talking about theories and causes and explanations of therianthropy. The main difference is that a theory of therianthropy is something general and not tied to one person and one's experiences, while a cause and explanation of one's therianthropy is related to one person's personal experience. Keep in mind that I'm not all-knowing and that I can impossibly know every single cause and explanation of a therian. Those are just a few very common seen examples. A theory of therianthropy is the survival theory. You can imagine those Neanderthals having to fight for their own home, having to search for food, fight animals. Honestly, we humans were weak. We have no sharp teeth, no claws, we have nothing but a few tools. We were weak. They would imagine being a wolf, because a wolf was faster, stronger, fiercer than a human, romanticizing, and it made the person have more confidence, feel like they were stronger or faster than they actually were. It gave something extra that helped them survive. There's also theory behind why there are so many wolves and tigers and dragons and other cool and strong animals. Now the theory is that in this modern society we still kept this survival instinct and kept the tendency to identify something stronger and bigger than ourselves. Another theory is a lot of animals got killed. This is mainly by therians who identify as an animal because of a past life or a soul. Those people say that a lot of wolves got killed by hunters, and that is why there are a lot of wolf souls. It doesn't make a lot of sense because chickens, pigs and cows die way more often than wolves. Insects die all the time, and how many dinosaurs did actually die? Like a few million of them? But I think that the survival theory could perhaps maybe interfere with this past life theory where that a lot of animals died and that's why there are a lot of souls. Because by this, our human body would more likely adapt a soul of a strong animal instead of a small weak animal. Another theory on therianthropy is simple: the complexity of human mind. We are extremely developed animals. It is basically proven that we can identify as literally anything, even a chair or a helicopter. It is pretty unlikely because we will more likely identify as something we've seen and known for a very long time. This is why there are a lot of wolves and dogs. This is another theory related to this, the culture theory. Culture theory means that you will likely identify as something you know and you have seen a lot in your life, instead of something you don't really know or haven't seen a lot in your life. We humans are likely to identify with something we're seeing. Imagine watching a movie and having this head person. You're more likely to identify with a head person, meaning because he has qualities that you recognize in yourself and because you see him more often. Identify as a wolf happens in the same way. Wolves are the keystone of human culture in most countries. Movies, books, child stories and a lot of artworks. So we will see this and we will adapt to this. Also, pretty much any family in the world has owned a dog at some point or another. So the child who had a dog in the family will more likely identify as a dog because they see the dog every day in their life, instead of identifying as a giraffe that they only see twice a year in the zoo. Related to the culture theory, we have the relate theory, which means that we will identify as something that we can relate on other than a human. Especially people with a very low self-esteem, like self-confidence and everything like that, will more likely identify something non-human than something human, because we disgust being human. We disgust ourselves for being human. We're ugly, we're stupid, we're weak. So we will more likely identify as something that is an animal. No, not just any animal. We will identify as something we can relate to. A wolf living in a family structure, having those social skills and social bonds, having those behaviorisms even, that are very human-like, will mean that we more likely will identify as wolf that acts pretty much as a human with extra fur, instead of an ant that pretty much has almost nothing in common with a human. Now those are pretty much the most often seen theories behind therianthropy, which means that there are explanations of why we think therianthropy became a thing, why we think that people started identifying as therians. It is a misconception that therians have only been around since 2000. Therianthropy as a word has been created around 1992 You can also see that in some kind of artworks we see humans having animal qualities, humans looking sort of like an animal but still being human and stuff like that, which might be indicators that therianthropy has been around pretty much as long as humanity has been. Now on to explanations and causes of therianthropy. Past lives are certainly the most seen explanation of therianthropy in the therian community. It's important to know that having a past life doesn't automatically make one a therian, it only makes you a therian if you still identify as this animal in some way or another. It need to be fully, but at least partially, in this life. Most people say they had a life as a wolf or a cat or dog and anything else, they died and they returned as a human. Someone who believes that therianthropy is caused by a soul, having a soul of another animal than a human, believe that the soul usually came from a past life and got into them in this life, or that the soul traveled from somewhere else, like another plane, another being, or something else. Another very often seen causal explanation of therianthropy is simply the complexity of human mind. Most therians then don't really know what exactly happened, but just do know that it's something psychological. And because the brain of a human is so complicated, so complex and so smart, it can be pretty much anything. Imprinting. People will say that they mainly as a child saw other animals and imprinted them on their identity and their behavior. Those people often went through a very hard time as a child, or had some kind of trauma and often got helped by those animals, or just sort of lived with those animals or grew up with those animals. Unconscious coping mechanism. This means that you start unconsciously coping by having an animal identity with a life situation like bullying or trauma, by example. The difference between a coping link and a therian who identifies as an animal because of an unconscious coping mechanism is that a coping link reduces it consciously. He decides, let me identify as an animal so I can cope with this situation. While a therian who has an identity of an animal because of unconscious coping had never decided to identify as this animal. Some people say that they used to cope with this unconsciously when they were younger and that it developed in an actual identity no longer related to the coping mechanism when growing up. There are a lot more of those reasons, there are a lot more of those explanations. Everyone is different, everyone has a personal journey, everyone has his personal explanation, cause and experience. One can be a psychological therian, by the way, which means that they identify as an animal because of psychological reason or cause or explanation. One can also be a spiritual therian, which means that they identify as an animal because of a spiritual reason, cause or explanation. So please be free to share your explanations or causes in the comment section down below. I identify as a Swiss shepherd dog and a pink river dolphin. I believe I identify as a Swiss shepherd dog maybe because of a spiritual reason. I used to believe in dual soul theory, but I no longer think that it's the solid reason or the only reason or even the reason at all. I started to believe that my identity as a Swiss shepherd dog might be spiritual and psychological, or only psychological after all. Identify as a pink river dolphin because of psychological explanations and causes. I believe that I started identifying as this probably because of bullying and as an unconscious coping mechanism. I also really want to thank everyone who has sent me art. It's amazing to receive art from you all. And I see you in the next video. Video.